because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. Oh, you make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. It may be plain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Oh, your love never fails. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. I could sing that long for a long time. Amen. You make how many things? All things. Even the bad things? Whoa, that's a new concept. He makes everything in your life according to his purpose for your good. Amen? Let's greet one another. Tell them hello. You know, that's just not a trite saying that we were talking about before. How God takes even the bad things, all things in our life, and makes them to our good. Just ask Job, right? It's a real thing in our life. It's not easy sometimes. But our God is a good, good Father. If anybody knows how to be a father, it's our God. Amen. I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whispers of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. 'Cause you're perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways to us. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Thank you, God. We can't stop God from being God. And he loves us because he loves us. I don't get it. Look at me. I don't get it. But he's a father, and he loves like a father. It's who I am. It's who I am. And that's the only reason he needs. Amen. Letting go of every single dream, I lay each one down at your feet. Every moment of my wandering never changes what you see. I've tried to win this war, I confess. My hands are weary, I need your rest. Mighty warrior, king of the fight. No matter what I face, you're by my side. When you don't move the mountain, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers, as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. Truth is, you know what tomorrow brings. There's not a day ahead you have not seen. So in all things be my life and breath. I want what you want, Lord, and nothing less. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers, as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. You are my strength and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plan
trust, I will trust. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers, as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. I will trust in you. I will trust in you.
I will trust in you. I will trust in you. When everything is going wrong, Lord, and I don't understand, one thing is constant. You are God, and I will trust in you. I'll trust you, God. I'll trust you. What a powerful God. I could just soak this in. I'm sorry, but God is real today in this place. This is good stuff. I will trust in you, God, no matter what happens. Hungry, I come to you, for I know you satisfy. I am empty, but I know your love does not run dry. So I wait for you. So I wait for you. I'm falling on my knees, offering all of me. Jesus, you're all this heart is living for. Broken, I run to you, for your arms are open wide. I am weary, but I know your touch restores my life. So I wait for you. So I wait for you. I'm falling on my knees, offering all of me. Jesus, you're all my is so strong, Father. We worship you. Hear our hearts cry, God. Hear our hearts cry. Bless you, God. Bless you, God. Yes. That's worship. You may be seated if you can. And the children can be dismissed to Children's Church. God bless you. Have a bunch of fun and learn about God.
Before we start this morning, I wanted to just say a few more things about who we are as a church. I think it's good to review and to ponder rather than just get caught in a routine. Let's just think a little bit. Sometimes what happens in church is the audience has like a little cue card, and they're checking off things, how the worship service goes, and they look up at the worship team and they say, well, I didn't really care for that song. That wasn't the song I was looking for. Or they repeated the verse or the chorus too many times, so we kind of check that off. Or sometimes when the ushers are passing through, well, he didn't smile at me, so we check that off. Or someone didn't come to greet me. Or so we have this critical spirit, and we just get used to it. I want to say, I want you to think differently when you come in to the worship service. It's not about you critiquing what's going on stage. Here's what I'd like to shift. And I've said this before in previous sermons. Philosopher Kierkegaard said this, and I really like what he said. He said, the audience is not y'all. It's God. God is the audience. The actors are not these folks here. The actors are you, and you, and you. You are the actors, and this is the stage. You're on the stage. And so when God, the audience, is watching, he's watching you. Because he wants to see, this is the only time in the 1 week when we get gathered together for worship, and we worship the King, and he is the audience. He's watching the words we sing. He's listening to our heart. He's seeing how we respond to each other. He's monitoring our thoughts. And he's waiting for us to be set free from all that other stuff so that we can be free to worship him. And so he's watching us. And the folks up here are prompters, whispering cues for you to act. So if that's what it is, which I think that's a very wonderful concept, when we come, what time do we come? Do we come early? Do we come with anticipation? Do we come with a heart that says, God, I have worshiped you privately, and I'm ready to worship you now today? That's part of what he wants. And so I want you to think that through. Every Sunday when you come in and say, okay, what am I bringing to God to give my heart back up in worship to him? Because he's watching me and all those around me, and my heart, my attitudes, my thoughts, my everything. And it's to be focused on him. Now, Marianne, you want to come up? This is Marianne, and I've asked if she would just share her story because I think it's good. It's good for us to understand who people are, and you realize they might have a happy face or whatever, but you don't know all the stuff that goes on in their life, and so she's going to share some of that. So she doesn't know all of what I'm going to ask, so this is just typical. But she trusts me. You can tell, that she trusts me. So where did you grow up, Marianne?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I lived there for 10 years, and then Pennsylvania for 8.
In Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So how many brothers and sisters, and where are you in the pecking order?
Just one older sister, and she beat me up all the time, so probably lower ranking than her.
Okay. She's not here to defend herself, so yeah.
Nah.
So, how did you grow up in a spiritual sense? What was the atmosphere in your home when you grew up?
Like Derek, my parents divorced when I was young, and so my mom raised me and my sister as a single mom in Brooklyn. We bounced around from church to church, and she was always on the worship team, and me and my sister were always brats, and we would usually run around in the gym and wait till church was over. But when we got older, she would make us sing with her.
Okay.
So we grew up singing in the church. We were always in the choir, from old hymns to gospel to we've sang it all. So
Okay.
as we moved to Pennsylvania, because of the divorce, and it happened to be 2 weeks before September 11th.
Wow.
And so we really got into church in this tiny town in Milford, Pennsylvania. And even though I had grown up in the church and I could tell you the stories, nothing had clicked until I went to Young Life in high school.
And Young Life is a young people's high school?
So Young Life is a nonprofit Christian organization, and they get it. Like, they know how to talk to high school kids about Jesus, and it is incredible to watch and be a part of. And the best way I can describe it is growing up your entire life saying, I believe this chair can hold my weight, and walking by the chair every Sunday and saying, I believe that it can hold my weight, but Young Life actually places you in the chair.
So there was a point where you committed your life to Christ then?
Yep, I was in high school. I was a little turd, and I didn't have any of these tattoos. A wide-eyed kid. And Jeff Pearson, who was my Young Life leader's husband, told the story of the woman caught in adultery. And I did not realize then how profound that Bible story was going to mean to me. And that was the moment that I was like, wow, I want that.
So how did your life change?
I started being a volunteer leader for the middle school kids. I was just a high school kid, and I didn't really know anything except for the fact that I knew the stories and was really goofy, and they loved it, and I loved it, and poured into these middle school kids, which is very funny because after the military, I worked for Young Life, and I worked at a camp way down in Virginia, and those middle school kids happened to be campers at that camp one week. Oh my God, they're all bigger than me now, and I'm like, it was awesome.
You decided to go into the military. What was your original goal to get into the military? What were you?
I wanted to be a chaplain's assistant.
A chaplain's assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And you defend the chaplain.
Yeah, so the chaplain isn't legally allowed to carry a weapon, so I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect job. I'm going to be the bodyguard and the disciple, so I want to be that person.
So how'd that work out?
Didn't work out at all. I scored really well on the math, and so they were like, oh, that's cute. You want to be a chaplain's assistant. You're going to be a jet mechanic. So I was an active duty jet mechanic for 4 years in the Air Force, and I had never touched a wrench before I went in. I failed the tool test twice.
On purpose?
No, it had pictures and a word bank. Not on purpose. I really tried. My sergeant at the time was like, there's no way you're going to pass the final exam. So he just pushed me to the final exam, and I couldn't remember the tools. So I had to make up songs to sing all the definitions, and that was how I passed.
Okay. So where were you stationed?
I was in Texas for boot camp, and then 8 hours north, still in Texas, for training school. That was a half a year, and then I moved to Illinois for Sky Air Force Base, and that was where I really started. It was a brand new unit, so I was the only female and youngest serving member of that unit. So those were good times.
Yeah. Now you have a service dog.
Yes. His name's Cooper. You may not pet him. I'm so sorry. He's just not past that part of training yet. And honestly, I don't even know what he does. He falls asleep at my feet. He's really good.
Want to give a little context?
Yeah, so some people confuse him for a drug dog, but he's actually my service dog. I have what's called PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And it means that I have irrational responses to rational things. And it can be very difficult. So they gave me a puppy. You need a dog is what you need. I gotta tell you though, after all the medications the VA throw at us, this is the best.
Well, he's a gentleman, and we appreciate that. You're going to sing a song that you've written.
Yes.
And how do we enter into that?
Okay. So the name of this song is called Muddy Lashes, and Derek and I usually sit way in the back, and, sermon after sermon, you had gone over, the boy who shared his fish. Like, I never thought about that kid in that story, even though I had heard it hundreds of times. And Jesus spitting in the dirt and rubbing it in his eyes, and it's like, that guy had no idea what was going on. He was like, whatever's happening, I'm in. And that's awesome, and I wanted to write a song about that. So this song is called Muddy Lashes, and it's about coming to church and identifying with something in the story. And you can hear that story 100 times, and you could identify with something different every single time, but feeling like I was there, I was a part of that story. I see me in that. Because Christ saw us when he was on the cross. And I wrote a song about that.
Okay.
And you're going to make me sing it.
I will.
If this is your first time coming to church and you're nervous, you have no idea what nervous is.
Jesus was good at giving people different names, making altars out of graves, flipping tables, mats, and minds. Jesus was a carpenter. He was a seeker of the sinners and saints, lover and a teacher who knows my name, hanger of the stars in my darkest nights. People questions, teach about grace, navigating mountains and crowds and flames, challenging the hearts of everybody around. Jesus was a wanderer, a whisperer of waves and commander of storms, not afraid to weep when his heart was torn. Washing dirty feet, love took a meal down. Drawing in the sand. all trades and master's sons. Tried to keep him in a grave, but you can't trap love, and he still loves me even when I am the woman at the well. I am the drawing in the sand. I am the crippled on a mat. I'm the mud in every lash. I'm the nails in his hands. I am the robber on a cross. I am the tears dried with hair. I am the silver for a kiss. I'm the boy who shared his fish in every part and in every prayer. From the start, I see me there. We did it.
Looking for volunteers after the service who are going to write their own songs and sing next week. Thank you, Marianne. That was very sweet. It's the concept of going through the scriptures and realizing you were there. You know, in your mind's eye, you can say, what was it like? And that's when I read the Gospels. I say, what would I do if I was there? How would I be if I was the little boy who God fed 10,000 people with my lunch for my mom? How would I do that? What if I was the guy that got his eyes splattered with mud and then washed them and could see again? How would I respond? Well, this last week we studied about Lazarus. You may turn to John 11, please. In John 11, Jesus was notified that his good friend Lazarus was sick. And Mary and Martha, the two sisters, expected Jesus to come and to heal him, as did, I'm sure, the disciples. And probably if I was there, I would have expected it too. And Jesus said, Lazarus is sick, and he stayed where he was 2 more days. And Lazarus died. Made no sense. Made no sense at all in the understanding who this wonderful God, who he is. So we pick up the story now. Jesus has come. He's going to speak to Mary and Martha. He's going to do something pretty significant. And I want you to understand who this Jesus is. And he addresses people differently in the different stages of their life. And depending on what's going in their world, he addresses different people in different ways. And I want you to know that. When you stop and talk with people, your neighbor, your person at work, your children or your spouse in your home, how do you respond? You respond differently in different situations depending on what's going on. And I want you to think that through. So in our notes here this morning, there's 4 different ways that Jesus responds, and I think it's a good example for us. The first one is that he challenges our intellectual thinking. He makes us think. John 11, starting verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again at the resurrection, the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? Yes, Lord, she said, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. I just want to pause and think about this. You see, in their culture, where this was all happening, there was a belief that when someone died, that the soul and the spirit just kind of hung around to see if this body would raise back up from the dead. They would wait for 3 days. There was this thinking going on that possibly this body could rise again and it would be reunited with body, soul, and spirit. So they would wait for 3 days. Isn't that interesting? They would wait. But now this is 4 days. It's obvious it's over. And now Jesus shows up on the doorpost. And Martha, the one who was the great servant, came out to him. And she says, now, I would love to be there and see the tone that she said this in. Was she sad? Was she crying? Or was she angry? She says this, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, I don't know what is she saying. Why did you come? I think that's a fair question, actually. Why didn't you come? I know you love my brother. He loves you. Why didn't you come? But then in 22, she says, but I know even now God will give you what you ask. I think she's saying, well, what can you do now? Jesus had raised other people. But Jesus is there to actually prove a point. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Not just something in the future, but I am the resurrection and the life now. Do you believe that now? And she says, I believe you're the Christ. And she doesn't really answer his question. But Jesus is challenging her to think. Don't think like the world thinks, that 3 days have gone by, now 4 days has passed. And for those of you who are seeking Christ, God will challenge your intellectual thinking. In the office here, Jen, the secretary, and I were working up in the office, and she got a call from one of the high school students. And the high school student said, they've changed teachers on me, and now the teacher is really pushing not creationism, but Darwin thinking and all sorts of other things. What do I do now? And they're not sympathetic for that. And so we had this discussion on what to do about that. And this young person is being challenged with that. But Jesus is trying to challenge you to think through from God's perspective. The second way he comes is he comforts our emotional needs. Look at verse 28. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. Now let me just pause here for a minute. What they had is they had professional mourners during those days. And so when our American funerals are pretty rational and controlled, and we value stoicism and, stiff upper lip kind of thing. But here they would have professional mourners who come in and wail and mourn and cry. And so these people were there trying to comfort her. So verse 32, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Does that sound familiar? It's the exact words that her sister just said. Now, my thinking is that they probably had a little discussion going on. Where's Jesus? This is our dark hour here. He loved this man, our brother. Where was Jesus? If he had only come, he wouldn't have died. And so they say the same words. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, these are the mourners, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Verse 35, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could he who had opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So there's a lot of things going on here. And Mary was the one who was worshiping. And she came out and she said the very words her sister had. Jesus, why didn't you do something? What's going on? And so Jesus is drawing all this and seeing all this going on. And it says that he wept. Now, there's not a lot of places where Jesus wept. He wept over Jerusalem, but here he wept over this. Now, it doesn't say why he wept. Now, when I was a young person in having training, we would have a weekly training. It was like a night where you'd go to this lady's house and she would have like a kids thing, a kids night. And I would get badges for doing different things. One of them was memorizing verses. And I tried to convince her that you could pick your own verses. And I wanted to use this one because I thought this was a good one. Jesus wept. I could memorize that real fast. But she never let me do that. But why did Jesus weep? I think the real question here is, why is he weeping? Now, we would naturally think that it would be because of empathy and compassion. He cared for this man, and he was sad. Yes. But he knew more than that. The next possibility is on your worksheet here, the second half of your worksheet. He was disappointed at the people's unbelief. This is toward the end of his ministry of 3 years, and they still didn't get who he was. They didn't get it. And I think he was just drawing all this in, and they're weeping over the death of Lazarus. And it struck him. Or, letter C here, he was angered at the impact of sin and death. Sometimes I watch the news or I watch stories about people on the news, and I get angry or sad. Just the impact of what sin has in people's lives. So why did Jesus weep? It could have been any of those three. I personally like B. I like that he was disappointed in them, that they didn't understand who he was. Because he had just said, in the context here, to Martha, don't you realize I'm the resurrection and the life? I am. It's not this deed that I do, it's I am. And the whole thing with what he's going to do here with Lazarus, why it's so important is, in just a very few days, he's going to be crucified. And they're going to wait for 3 days to see what happens. And on the third day, he's out of there. He raises himself from the dead by the power of God. So this is a big deal here, and he's at the end of his ministry. They still don't get it. Number 3, he commands our physical problems. When you struggle in life, and we pray often for people's sickness or health, we ask God to step in. Watch this. Verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was the cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. They didn't have all the chemicals and things that we do to keep people from smelling like this, and so the body is deteriorating. Verse 40, then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God? See, he already knew what he was going to do. Verse 41, so they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. He's still trying to prove that he's Christ, the Son of God. And so he's speaking out loud for everyone to listen. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Jesus healed Lazarus. Now, many commentaries over the years have said this. He said, Lazarus, come forth, because if he said, come forth, what would have happened? Everybody's out. So he said, Lazarus, come forth. And he did. He had the power to do that, and he has command over physical problems. And I think it's very right of us to pray in the name of Jesus to see people healed. God is still sovereign, and he has ability. Now, the question I have here with this part of Lazarus, how did Lazarus come out of the grave? He was wrapped up with aloes and other things, and they wrapped him up, including his legs and arms and everything. How does someone who's wrapped up in cloth move? You ever try to do that when everything is bound up? I think he floated out. Now, here's the question. Did he float out standing up, or did he float out vertical or horizontal, laying down? I don't know. I would have loved to have been there to see, and that's probably one of the questions I'll ask when I get up there, like, how do you do this? What did it look like? But it doesn't really matter, because Jesus says, remove those grave clothes and set him free. And they had their brother back. And it was a phenomenal thing. This Jesus had command over even death. Now, this is very important, because in just a few days, he himself is going to be raised from the dead, and Lazarus was a type of Christ. The fourth way he deals with people is he confronts their unbelief. Verse 45. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. Now, that's interesting. People are starting, they see what he said, how he did, what happened. They said, this is the Messiah. And they put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. These are the religious elite. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here's a man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. The place they're talking about is the temple. And these religious people were afraid that they were going to lose power. And so they say, what are we going to do about this Jesus? He's doing miraculous things, and he's claiming great things, and people are being changed. They're all going to his side. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better, watch this, for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. Now, that's a pause on that one. He says it's better for one man to die than the whole nation. When Christ died, he died for the nation, but he died for you and me. It's better that one man die, and he's actually the only man that could die to set us free, because he took our guilt and pain and sin with him on the cross. Better for one man to die than everyone else. Verse 51. He did not say this on his own, but as a high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for the nation, but for those scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer went and moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to the region near the desert, a village called Ephraim, and there he stayed with his disciples. And so I'll just stop there. The point is that even unbelieving people, in this case the high priest, made a prophecy about Jesus, and it was correct. Jesus confronts our unbelief. And so my question for you is, this week when you're dealing with people, are you there to challenge their intellectual thinking of who Jesus is? And maybe take whatever circumstances it is and say, have you considered Jesus? He comforts those with emotional needs. There are many times when we go to funerals or when people are sick or whatever, and they don't need to have an intellectual discussion at that moment, typically. What they do need is for you to show compassion and have a listening ear and care for them. And that speaks volumes of who your God is. He commands our physical problems. Maybe there's something you can do to relieve the pain of others and help them. And then finally, he confronts unbelief. There comes a point where you have to say, you are wrong. This is truth, not what you believe. And you have to confront wrong. You can do it boldly, and you can do it with a smile on your face. You don't have to be nasty about it. But you have to say what's right and wrong sometimes. So when you look this week, what are you going to do? And who is Jesus to you? And Marianne sang this morning in the songs about, I am the woman at the well, I am the nails in his hands, I am the mud on the eyelashes. She is saying that she identified with the need for Christ at any given moment. What about you? Let's do communion this morning, and let's pause and ponder who this great God and this great sacrifice, what he's done for us.
All the earth will shout your